everybody. Welcome to part two of this lecture. Maybe give me 2 seconds to make sure I don't get overlapping sound. I think we should be good to go. Okay, cool beans. So, so. Um, there's no way around it. We're talking about the Nazis tonight. Last week, Tuesday, we talked about the fascists in Italy and how the fascists came to power. We're going to be looking at the Nazis tonight. And the goal with tonight is to make sure that we are ready to talk about the Eichmann trial come the end of the week. And look, there's no real easy way to talk about the man in the picture here. But I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try to tell this story as best I can. And try to help you get into the headspace of Germany during this moment in time. Because if you've been paying attention, those of you who have been sitting in my classes, you guys will have noticed that we've kind of covered all of the big World War II players up to this point. We talked about Italy. We talked about Japan. We talked about China. We talked about Russia. Germany's kind of the only one we haven't talked about. And not for nothing, this is the end of our Unit 3 with this. So, let's talk about Germany. Now, what's fascinating here is just like with the Soviet Union, we often forget this. Germany experiences revolution at home. Experiences revolution at home that causes an end to the war. We're all caught up in what happens in the Soviet Union, and I think that's fair. But we often forget that they're not the only ones that see this sort of massive revolution that brings about an end to the war. Not for nothing, we don't have time to talk about it as part of my World II class, but same thing happens in Turkey. Ataturk comes to power and removes the Ottoman Empire, reforms into Turkey. But in Germany, what's interesting is that you see this sort of mirroring of what happens in Russia. Essentially, the way I like to think about what happens in Germany is, imagine if the events of the Russian Revolution ended in February. You sort of jump into the multiverse of madness, and you find a universe in which Lenin never returns to the Soviet Union. The Vanguard Party never happens. And equally, Kerensky exits the war as he's supposed to. That's kind of what happens in Germany. The Kaiser is removed from power, and in his place, a republic is formed. The constitution of that republic is signed in the German city of Weimar, hence the name that historians and students of history have given it, the Weimar Republic. Okay? I think it's important to mention that Germans would likely not have referred to their government as the Weimar Republic. We refer to it as the Weimar Republic, because this is kind of how we like to remember it and distinguish it based on what's going on in the rest of the world, and so on and so forth. What's fascinating about the Weimar Republic is that the Weimar Republic is the first truly German government. It's the first government made by and for a united Germany. You see, the Kaiser was just a holdover from the old Prussian monarchy. More on that in a minute when we talk about, German unification. But for the first time, this is a German government run by Germans for Germans. So you might be thinking, wow, that's a good thing. That's a great thing. What could go wrong? Well, it turns out quite a bit. Because the Weimar Republic was perhaps doomed from the start. It has systemic problems with its economy, systemic problems with public corruption, and systemic problems with political instability. And last but not least, we have to talk about our younger types. We have to talk about the veterans coming home from World War I. Now, students in my class have been watching a movie called Max, 2002, John Cusack. Very good. And in Max, there is a line said by one veteran to another veteran. I'm not going to spoil who the veterans are. But he says, you came home to your family, to your wife, to your life, and to best care in the world. I came home to nothing. No country, no home, no food, no money, no address, nothing. Not even a closet full of happy memories. Nothing. Literally. And he's not the only one. There's a proverbial army of people like this coming home to nothing. At the very least in Italy, when the veterans came home, at the bare minimum, they came home to a fascist party willing to give them a one big bear hug and say, come on, join the movement. The German veterans, they have nothing. And so they do the only thing they can think to do. The army has been abolished in Germany as part of the Treaty of Versailles and will continue to be for the next 5 years. But the barracks are still there. The infrastructure is still there. And so they just occupy them. They squat in there illegally because it's better than homelessness. And they begin to form these violent paramilitary groups that live and operate around these barracks. And they begin to refer to themselves as Die Freikorps, the free companies. Now, I want you to bear all this in mind as I tell the story of these early years after World War I. But before I do, a quick conversation, and I don't know what happened to my picture here. No, here. I don't know what happened to my picture here. This is just a placeholder. Whatever. We move. I want you to think of nationalism not just as an ism, but as a question. Nationalism as a question. Where is Germany? Not just what is, like, not just like nationalism as Germany is the best, but what does that mean? Where is my country? What is culturally my country? And who is German? Because these are the questions that nationalism asks of the Germans. And we have never really thought of nationalism as a question because in the United States these questions are easy to answer. Where is America? Well, that's easy. It's a straight line with Canada, the Rio Grande border with Mexico, and fish. These are America's borders. Easy to figure out, easy to understand. As you will see with Germany, that's not so easy. Americans have more of a conversation on what is American and who gets to call themselves American. But even then, not to the degree that the Germans did. But let me show you the where is Germany, because you really have to see it to believe it. These are 4 maps of Germany, separated by a century, 100 years. 1850 on the left, 1950 bottom right. What you will see in the map on the left is Germany prior to unification. And as you can see, candidly, it's a bit of a mess. Well, perhaps that's an understatement. It's very much a mess. German unification is a little bit different to what happens in Italy. Because in Italy, there is this feeling, as I said last class, that if the Italians don't unify their own country, it's not going to happen. Nobody is going to do it for them. But for the Germans, they believe that the solution lies with the 2 major countries on the border of Germany. Austria to the south and east, Prussia to the north and east. Prussia and Austria. What I will say is that these two countries don't just represent a difference of what country is going to, slap their name on the new country. No. The differences between Austria and Germany are profound. And they are profound in the way they understand the world. You see, Austria is the queen of diplomacy. Austria believes in a path for Germany made of diplomacy, made of economic power, one in which Germany is at the center of the diplomatic universe of Europe. Because that's what Austria had done. The Austrians have a proverb. Where the other countries make war and chaos, you, happy Austrian, marry. Austria is the queen of diplomacy because Austria marries into every major royal house of Europe. All of them. In our class on the Russian Revolution, we talked about the child of Tsar Nicholas II, born with a severe genetic condition, hemophilic porphyria. His blood doesn't clot. And we said one of the main things that causes hemophilic porphyria is incest. Austria is the reason. Let's try that again. Austria is the reason why. Because Austria, in intermarrying with all of the families of Europe, has made it so that they are all related and continuing to intermarry with one another, forming a gene pool that's about as shallow as a kiddie pool. If you don't believe me, and you want some nightmare fuel, and you're wondering what handsome Squidward would look like as a real boy, go Google the Habsburg chin or the Habsburg jaw to see exactly what repeated generations of incest will do to a human face. I will just say it's like the Crimson Chin from Fairly Odd Parents, but very real. Just it's something. But that's what happens. The Austrians are the queens of diplomacy. But that's not Prussia. Prussia is offering a very different vision for Germany. And candidly, it's the path that Germany ends up taking. Because in Prussia, if Austria is the queen of diplomacy, Prussia is the lord of war. In Prussia, the military is everything. So much so that their proverb is, in other countries, the state has an army. In Prussia, the army has a state. It is the army that has the government. Now. It is Prussia that ends up unifying all of this area, forming a political entity under the Kaiser, who is king of both Prussia and Germany. Then World War I happens. And as you can see, a large amount of Prussia is removed to form a new country. Poland. Well, to reform a new country. Poland. Finally, after the end of World War II, Germany is subdivided into these 4 areas of control by the Allied powers and eventually reforms into East and West Germany. Why do I bring this up? What if you live here in East Prussia? For the past 40 years, your identity has gone from being Prussian to German to Polish in about 40 years. Just unironically, it has. Are you German? You speak German. You have papers that say once upon a time you were German. Where is Germany in all of this mess? You see the problem? Germany's borders are fuzzy. Germany is more of a concept than it is a place. And this is part of the issue. About who is German? Well, over the break, over Thanksgiving, and I was really thinking about, one of the things that Mussolini says about the war rhetoric, and that kind of stuck with me. That is that war can define a national identity. And it's something that I wanted to disagree with. But the more I thought about it, the more it kind of made sense to me. Not for the reasons that Mussolini thinks. You see, there is a point in there that a country's first war defines their national identity. Case in point, in the United States, our first big war is the Civil War. It defines our national character, our national identity. For Germany, that war is World War I. World War I defines what it means to be German. Let me say it again. World War I defines what it means to be German. Because it is the first war fought by a unified Germany. Not against itself, not against a rebellion, but against the other countries of Europe. And so to be a true German is to answer the call. When Germany calls, the German people answer. When Germany needs us, the German people go. When Germany says jump, the German people say how high. Because we are nationalists who love our country. We call this the spirit of 1914. You guys saw those pictures from our World War I class of, these I don't want to say awful pictures, but these sad pictures of, Germans happy and ecstatic to go to war. This is one of the reasons why. Only the difference is that in Germany, it defines what it means to be German. A real German goes to fight in World War I. And so the question becomes, by that logic, who isn't German? Who is not German according to this logic, according to these rules? The answer is anyone who opposes the war. Pacifists, they're not German. Socialists, not German. Oh, sorry, my video here is in the way. Hold up. There we go. Much better. Socialists, not German. Bolsheviks, please. Half of them are Russian. Not German. Not German like you and I are German. Democrats and liberals and capitalists, please. Not German. We're German. They aren't. We're the real ones. Congratulations, brave German soldiers. You were successful. Thanks to your efforts, the enemy did not put a single footstep in Germany. World War I and World War II are very different. Don't forget this. In World War I, largely trench warfare, there is no Frenchman, no Russian, or Brit, or American who shows up in Germany and captures the flag. It never happens. You, brave German soldiers, successfully defended your homeland. You did the job. You did what was required of you. You won this war. Or did you? Because this is the war guilt clause of the Treaty of Versailles that brings an end to the war. The Allied and associated governments affirm, and Germany accepts, the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and all the damage to which the Allied and the associated governments and their nationals have been subjected as a consequence of the war imposed upon them by the aggression of Germany. So we defended the homeland, and yet somehow we've lost the war. Number one. And number two, we are accepting guilt for the war, a war that we didn't even start. I'd like to remind you that the Germans don't start the fire. The Austrians and the Russians, if you want to play that game, start World War I. Germany never started World War I. Germany was just out here catching strays. What gives? I didn't sign this. Did you sign this? How did we end up signing this document? This humiliation after we won the war? Well, I'd like to remind you of what I said at the start of the class. Germany experiences revolution at home, and the new government seeks peace to end the war. There's one minor hiccup with all of this. We weren't home. We were in the trenches. We were in the trenches fighting the war for all of those people that stayed behind. And while we were in the trenches, they rose up, got rid of our king, and then pulled the rug out from under us. Betrayed us. Or, stabbed us in the back. Stabbed in the back. That's what happened. We were betrayed. We were stabbed in the back. By who? Well, by the intellectuals. By the fat cats. By the in the corner. The lying newspaper journalists. Fake news. That have been publishing lies that we are losing the war. Because we are on the ground and we know that we're not losing the war. Stabbed in the back by who? By all of these people. All of these fake Germans that stayed behind and made a fake Germany when we weren't home. Stabbed in the back. And then, a change. Because it quickly becomes, and you know who else isn't German? Not German. Not real Germans. And so very quickly, this became this. Stabbed in the back. There's more explicit versions of this kind of propaganda. I'm particularly partial to the one here on the left because it's the only one that I found featuring a communist, dressed, of course, as a criminal. My man looks like the Hamburglar. But the one on the right is perhaps even more explicit. And if it wasn't obvious, let me make it obvious. This is all bullshit. Everything I've just said. It's not true. None of it is true. But remember what I said last time about the nature of fascism. It doesn't need to be true. That's the thing with fascism. Fascism isn't about the truth. Fascism is a feeling. Fascism is what you feel is the truth. Not here, not here, but here. The politics of the gut, not of the brain or the heart. The politics of the gut. It's a visceral feeling. And it's irrational. And it's crazy. I said, in our last class, I said, think about how crazy it is that a cabal of Jews and socialists have gotten together to make sure that you, Germany, do not win World War I. But this is why they believe it. And I would highlight that it is rather convenient that these veterans come to believe a conspiracy theory version of events that entirely absolves them from having lost World War I. Right? It absolves them from having lost the war. Because in this version of events, the soldiers aren't responsible for Germany losing. It's this shadowy conspiracy theory that caused Germany to lose. Many Germans were all too willing to believe the charge of the radical right that the end of the war was a consequence not of military defeat, but of civilian defeatism. Essentially, that the war was lost not on the battlefield, but at the dinner table. Not on the front lines, but on the home front. Why? Because a conspiracy of Jews and socialists undermined the morale of the home front and stabbed the courageous army in the back. And it's all not true. It's all bullshit. It doesn't need to be true for the members of the Freikorps to believe it. Not here, but here, in their guts. They believe it. They believe it because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel powerful. Or at the very least, it makes them feel not weak. Because it wasn't their fault that the war was lost. Do you understand? What's easier to accept? A hard truth or a convenient lie? Fascism quickly became about accepting a convenient lie. So let's talk Weimar. Because while all of this is going on, Weimar itself is in deep trouble, torn apart by deep political fractures. Weimar finds itself torn. Let me move again. This is getting a little annoying. There we go. Finds itself torn between two competing factions. The far left. Far left. Come on, there we go. The far left and the far right. Far left and the far right. And it's one of those situations where I really think the order of events matters. The order of events absolutely matters. Why? You have to remember what period we are in. 1919. In 1919, as soon as the war is over, the civil war in Russia is ongoing, which means Lenin is still alive, which means the NEP has not happened yet. Stalin has not taken control, and all of the other communists are still around. See, it is this part of the class that we'll see two books that my students have read collide. On the left, Darkness at Noon, and on the right, Storm of Steel. These things are not going to be two separate through lines of my class. These are about to become one. Because in the far left, our boy Trotsky is still around. Mr. Worldwide, advocating for global revolution, is sending out an army of Rubichovs to go around Europe fomenting global revolution. And Germany is no different. And on the right, Ernst Jünger has returned from the war and starting a new movement with his fellow veterans on the far right. The question is not who these factions are, it's who's going to make the first move. And the answer is the far left. They call it the Spartacist movement, the Spartacist uprising. This is an uprising that happens almost immediately after the war. Almost immediately after the war. It is led by Rosa Luxemburg, one of the most famous socialists you've likely never heard of. But Rosa Luxemburg is fundamentally important because she is the leader of the German socialist movement. And, to my knowledge, the first leader, female leader of a political movement not centered explicitly around women's rights. Like, I was trying to think earlier today if there was someone else who met that criteria, and I honest to goodness could not think of one. I couldn't. Alright? In the modern era, Rosa Luxemburg is the first female political leader of a political party. She leads the German socialists. Now, on the spectrum of mild social democracy to literally Vladimir Lenin, Luxemburg is somewhere in the middle. She thinks Lenin is a bit extreme with his vanguardism and with his, skullduggery and those kind of tactics that we talked about. Rosa Luxemburg believes in peaceful, direct action. Essentially, that if she can mobilize enough people to take to the streets and to demand political power for the working class, that the government will be compelled purely by the amount of people to give the socialist movement what it wants. And so the Spartacist uprising begins as such, a peaceful demonstration demanding control of the government. And the Weimar government freaks out. They freak out because you have to remember, as a response to the war, in the aftermath of World War I, Germany had to give up its army. Which means if Rosa Luxemburg wanted to waltz into the halls of government and pull a Lenin in October and say, "Look at me, I'm the captain now," there was no armed forces able to stop her from doing that. None. If she wanted power, she could just go and take it. And considering what has happened in places like Russia, considering what has happened in places like Italy, the Weimar government does not want to risk this. But they can't fight the left without an army. And so they make the first of quite a few mistakes. They ask the Freikorps for help. They declare open season on any marching communist in the streets. And the far right bring their guns and begin firing on crowds of people who were unarmed. As you may guess, the inevitable happens. The inevitable happens. It is a bloodbath. It is a slaughter. And these members of the far right are basically able to cement political status. They've been legitimized by their own government. In our last class, I talked about how it's what happens with the black shirts reminds me a lot of a hypothetical in which Jeff Bezos hires the Charlottesville people to go put out the worker strike in Staten Island. The equivalent of this would be if, at the height of the BLM protests, the government of, say, Michigan called up an army of Kyle Rittenhouse to show up during those protests and just start blasting, causing a bloodbath. Because that's exactly what happens here. It's not pretty. Rosa Luxemburg herself will lose her life in this. We know this because about a week later, her body is fished out of the river in Berlin, with all signs of abuse done to her. And I find it rather telling that one of history's first female leaders suffers that kind of a fate in a patriarchal society. Make of that what you will. But regardless, I want you to think of these events not from your perspective or my perspective, the perspective of students of history, but rather from the perspective of what I'm going to call normie Germans. The kind of German that's not really paying attention. That's kind of just, yeah, he's thinking about it, but not really. As far as the normie Germans are concerned, these Freikorps have just saved the country from a communist takeover. They're not villains. They're heroes. They've saved the country. And they know it. And so, the far right begins to take this political capital that's just been handed to them to form a new political movement. The National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. And this is where Adolf Hitler really starts to get more involved with this. Now, there's quite a few of you, I would imagine, who look at this and get really caught up on the name. The National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. National Socialist. By the way, that is what Nazi is. It's an abbreviation of Nationalsozialisten, right? How you would pronounce that in German. Nazi. However, just because this makes grammatical sense doesn't mean that it's real. Because listen, there's a whole bunch of let's just say bad faith internet personalities that take this sort of naming structure and go, herder, socialist is in the name, so the Nazis must have been leftist actually, down with the woke mob. I'm Steven Crowder, and I'm very smart. Like, honestly, it's idiotic. Because if you look at this for more than 2 seconds, you'll recognize that this doesn't make any sense. To call yourself a National Socialist is like calling yourself this, the Libertarian Democratic Republican Party of America. You might say to yourself, yeah, linguistically that makes sense. But if you think about it for more than 3 seconds, that doesn't make sense. How would this even work? It's like calling yourself a libertarian communist. How would that work? There is no such thing as a National Socialist. Because either you're a socialist or you're a nationalist. You can't be both. Socialism is by its very nature internationalist. Trotskyism. So, why then the names? Because these aren't adjectives. What these are buzzwords. Why? You have to imagine a political party before the era of really mass media. television, there's no internet, there's no Twitter. If a political party wanted to get a name for itself, it had two ways: radio, or the more likely one, posters, flyers. Imagine going to the supermarket and walking by a poster saying the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany holding a rally tonight. And you think to yourself, no, I don't recognize this party, but hey, I'm a nationalist. Hey, I'm a socialist. Hey, I'm a worker. I'm a German. You understand? The point is to get you to identify with at least one of these words. And when you do, you'll show up. And when you do, you instead find the truth that the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany is a party of virulent anti-Semitism. And you leave in disgust. But if 10 people show up and 8 leave in disgust, that's 2 recruits. You understand? These words are designed to get butts in seats, looking for the kind of person that is going to show up for the socialism and stay for the anti-Semitism. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for needles in haystacks. So the party starts to grow, slowly but surely, until an event. 1926, the Beer House Putsch. Hitler decides, after a rally, by the way, this is a true story, to take the people that he's just had a rally with and go to a bar. And to go to a beer house. And as they do, they've had a few too many, except for Hitler, who doesn't drink. Like, literally, he doesn't drink. But, they're all riled up. They're all a little tipsy. And Hitler has just said that their government is evil and it's full of, it's full of Jews and we have to do all this, and this. So they say, hey, Adolf, let's take over the government. All 30 of us. I don't know if you've been the sober friend in your group ever, but speaking from experience, trying to get a group of drunk people to do anything in an organized fashion is bordering on impossible, especially when that thing is, quote, taking over the government, the end of quote. So predictably, it doesn't go well. They're all captured, and Hitler is thrown in prison. Second mistake. Because when Hitler is thrown in prison, what it does is it makes the Weimar government look really, really bad. In Weimar, the government throws their political enemies in jail. And number 2, it forces Hitler to be disciplined for the first time in his life. For the first time, Hitler is forced to sit down and think. Because while the Nazi Party existed, there was no Nazism. There was no ideology. The Nazis were a party of grievance, betrayal, and anti-Semitism. Untargeted white rage. It was a party of frustration, a party of rage against everyone who would listen. But there was no ideology until this moment. Because alone in prison, with nothing but his thoughts and writing equipment, Hitler begins to produce a document, distilling all of these various ideas, these various frustrations, these various angers, distilling them into a document, a manifesto, a document that we refer to today. And he titles Mein Kampf. Roughly translates to my journey or my struggle. German's a weird language to translate. But now, Nazis have an ideology. They have a blueprint that they can follow. And when he leaves Germany, suddenly, events beyond his control help him out. Because he leaves prison in the late 20s. And as you know, there is a world event in the late 20s that drastically and dramatically shapes the world. 1929. The Great Depression. The Great Depression. When the global economy collapses, it has a ripple effect around the world, but no place more clear than in Germany. Let me explain. As a result of the War Guilt Clause, Germany was responsible for paying back hundreds of thousands of marks, millions of marks, M-A-R-K-S, to the countries of Europe, money that Germany did not have. And so they borrowed it. They issued a whole series of bonds to American financial institutions who paid them cash dollars to pay off their war debts. And then the Great Depression hits. And all of these American financial institutions find themselves in a situation with no money, but they're sitting on a pile of German government IOUs. So what happens when every bank in the world decides to cash in on their bonds all at once? Because they need the money. Germany doesn't have it. Mistake number 3. Germany can do one of two things. Either A, go bankrupt, or B, do what they did. Print out the exact amount of money that they needed to pay off their debt and send it overseas to pay them off. It is the worst thing they could have done. Because if you know your economics, you'll know that when a government prints out a bunch of money all at once, what you get is inflation. Inflation. Only it's worse, because at the very least, if I am a government and I print out a fuck ton of money, I can at the very least spend that money. The Germans can't, because the Germans have yeeted that money across the Atlantic. The Germans have done the equivalent of printing out all of this money, stacking it up in a neat little bonfire, and burning it. And burning it. The Germans find themselves in the nightmare economic situation called stagflation, in which a depression and hyperinflation are happening simultaneously. If you're ever in an econ class and you want to see your economics professor freak out, ask them about stagflation. It's a nightmare scenario that's very difficult, if not impossible, to get out of. And it is in this context that Hitler leaves jail. You see? You see? What did I say? The Jews have taken all your money. Doesn't need to be true. It needs to feel true. The Nazi Party goes from having maybe 5% of the polls to the low 30s, practically overnight. And with his newfound popularity, Hitler decides that he is going to run for president of Germany. To run for president of Germany. The 1931 election. Now, he doesn't win. His opponent is General von Hindenburg, a war hero and, candidly, yes, the Zeppelin guy. Hindenburg is very much a unity candidate. All the other people can get behind him, and very candidly, he's not Hitler, and so he wins by default. And he wins in a landslide. Hitler gains somewhere between 37 and 39% of the vote. Which doesn't seem like very much until I remind you that Hitler is running on a platform of, quote, the Jews took all of your money, the end of quote, and got 39% of the vote. Hindenburg stands up at attention and realizes that this Hitler kid might have something for Hindenburg to use. Mistake number 4. Hindenburg thinks to himself that in this time of uncertainty and chaos, what the Germans need is a unity government. And so, Hindenburg offers Hitler a job. A job! Chancellor of Germany. In charge of all of the administrative stuff that he didn't want to do. And Hitler accepts. Almost immediately after accepting the chancellor position, the Reichstag mysteriously burns down. The Reichstag is the German House of Parliament. It is their version of the Capitol building, and it burns down in an act of arson. It burns down in an act of political terrorism. Now the official line is that the person responsible was an angry socialist worker, angry that Hitler was now in his government. This may be true, but if you are moderately suspicious about this, I would say fair. Regardless, Hitler approaches Hindenburg and says, "How do you expect me to do my job in this climate of political terrorism? I need emergency powers. But more importantly, we don't know what kind of terrorism is on the horizon. So I need the power to grant myself emergency powers as needed, depending on the situation." And Hindenburg agrees. Hitler grants himself an extraordinary amount of emergency powers. And so when the inevitable happens, when poor, old Hindenburg dies in his sleep, Hitler uses the emergency powers that Hindenburg has just given him to announce no new elections. You know, I asked at the start of this class how it was possible for someone like Hitler to take power in a democratic society. And the common wisdom has been that the left in Germany was divided and squabbling amongst themselves, that they did not see the monster in their midst. I have always thought that this narrative is overblown for a pretty simple reason. Hitler lost the election in 1931. The left got their shit together. They voted for Hindenburg. Many of them did not like Hindenburg, but they voted for him anyway. I view the mistake as a question of how much were the Germans willing to sacrifice in a climate of political terrorism in order to feel safe. How much power were they willing to give Hitler, the new Chancellor of Germany, in order to feel safe? The answer was a lot. And before you, sitting in the United States, judge the Germans so much, I would ask if you've ever read the Patriot Act, and ask how many freedoms we in America were willing to give up in a climate of political terrorism. You see? It's easy to judge. Now, we will continue this on Friday, in class this time, when we talk about Hitler's policy, the Holocaust, and what happens the day after World War II, the Eichmann trial. I look forward to having that conversation with you. Guys, have a wonderful night. I will see you all on Friday.